Hey folks, Positive Paul. Here we are on Wednesday, September 30th, 2020, coming up around noontime. And these jokers are already buzzing around. They certainly don't want this video to get out. I don't know why they worry about that. I know I've got at least around 40 to 50 people that will tune in, check out what's going on. I appreciate that. But again, it looks like they got me stuck in the basement. It's impossible. Back in June, I was around 160 subscribers. And from basically June up until now, it would appear that I would pick up maybe 2, 3, 4 subscribers per day. But by the following day, I would lose 5 or more. And this seems to be the case again, as I was up almost to 190, and now I'm back down to 178. So that's really not my concern. The point is we know YouTube is certainly in on this disinfo campaign. And when one of us satanic ritual abuse survivors squeak through and survive and try to publicly give our testimony, YouTube, Facebook, and everywhere else are right there with their agents to ensure that any message concerning the false reality, any message concerning the second coming, any message concerning the ongoing experimentation, illegal experimentation on global citizens with their, essentially now, folks, we know at this point that all institutions across the globe have been taken over by hybrids. And, hey, if you want to call it the hive mind, which is, a very good way to put it, they seem to all be tuned in to one goal in mind, and that is to control humans, but moreover, essentially wipe them out, wipe them off the face of the planet. I'll never forget the original Planet of the Apes movie when Charlton Heston was riding the horse with, I forget her name, but he comes up to the statue of Liberty that looked like it was chopped in half or stuck in the sand. And he jumps off the horse. He gets on his knees, as I recall, and kind of breaks down. He's yelling and screaming, "What in the hell happened?" So this video is going to try to explain what the hell happened. And I love all you people that are doing these shape-shifting analysis videos. And you certainly, we can focus on Hollywood. We know that these Hollywood hybrid hacks we're surrounded by them. And moreover, the message that they send is one that goes completely against the Word of God, completely against the Ten Commandments, completely against any social norm where you see people by day, they've got their mask on, right? And they'll be all talking nice, tell you what you want to hear. But once the lights go out, folks, you know that these reptoids, these creepy chameleon Canaanites, these dirty dog Draco reptoid hybrids are up to no good. Now, I'll keep going back to Deuteronomy real quick. And this is one of the last times where they sum it up and they let the Israelites know what not to do and who to stay away from. Now, what's important is, let's see if we can get this. What's important is right here, Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 14. After the summary of there shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or daughter to pass through the fire. Now, what does that statement mean? Well, as I've stated for 4 years now, the baby boomer generation is either one of the dumbest generations alive, or they willingly handed over their children, which some of them did. And that's what that's all about. That's what MK Ultra was about. This is what satanic ritual abuse is about. But more importantly, what I want to get into is this Montauk project and how all these conspiracy theories are able to creep into the consciousness of the public, especially in America. But let's quickly look, Deuteronomy 18, verse 14. For these nations which thou shalt possess, hearken unto observers of times and unto diviners. But as for thee, the Lord thy God hath not suffered thee so to do so. The important thing is here, observers of times. Now, when we talk about remote viewing, when we talk about the chronovisor that apparently was developed by Arnetti there back in the mid-50s, a Vatican flunky, how's that sound? I know, folks. See, this is why you're not allowed to watch me, because I don't sugarcoat nothing. This Benedictine monk from the Vatican came up with a way to view the past through a thing called the chronovisor. But what I will tell you, folks, is this is directly related to the observers of times. Now, you certainly will never hear this in a Catholic church. Very few pastors out there are able to even get into what I'm going to get into right now. And it's because their focus is on not the right doctrine, folks, which is preaching the gospel of the Lord, found in Corinthians 1, chapter 15, 1 through 4. So when we talk about these observers of times, what were they doing back then? Well, it appeared that these Canaanites, the descendants of these Canaanites through the spirits of Cain and the original group, the spirits that came from the serpent, they understand that there is a group of people on planet Earth that have favor with the divine creator. And they became the Israelites. Now, they told you about the observers of times back in Leviticus. So this is something that, as you work your way through the Old Testament, they keep harping on that. So the point is, the spirit of Satan, the spirits of Cain, through the people of that generation, want to know what the divine creator would be up to. They want to know how to solve the conundrum of completely controlling mankind, even back then. So let's try to stay on track. Hey, look, these videos are very difficult. I do them off the cuff. I've done a lot of studying past 10 years and my own personal experience, so that's why I'm able to do this the way I am. This isn't no Hollywood production. But what we're going to try to get into is where these observers of times and diviners fit in to the modern era, specifically post-World War II, where it appears that mind control is running rampant, and not for good. So what we're going to do is we're going to quickly go over some issues concerning Montauk. You're not going to hear this from any super soldier. You're certainly not going to hear it from the little baby Draco hybrid, James Rink, who was groomed to take over the Montauk Project. But as I stated before, anybody that was going to be involved in this ongoing MK-style mind control experimentation concerning Montauk and concerning what went on between 1980 and August 12th, 1983, that they would have been selected, handpicked. They all would have been put through satanic ritual abuse from birth, trauma-based mind control. We know that for some reason, they focused on a certain group, blonde hair, blue eyes, young boys that were of Germanic, Celtic, Native American ancestry. But they all would have been moved into place around the year 1979. Right here is the border of New Jersey and New York State. Here's New York City. Right here, up on the border, where it says Amity, and that's not the Amityville that you know about, but right there is where my parents took myself, my younger sister, and my little brother. Now, my younger sister, we don't talk. We really haven't talked a couple times in, say, 30 years. Because she knows back, once we arrived to New Jersey, that I was not around for certain periods of time, specifically through 1980 through 1983. And she knows this because she was old enough. And this is how I'm amazed how the control system is to keep the lid on everything and have these families keep their mouths shut and go along with the program, never thinking once that there might be a consequence in the afterlife. So I'm moved up here in the middle of the Appalachian Mountains, in the middle of nowhere, in a town called Vernon. And I explained years ago, this was nothing but a Illuminati holding pen for a lot of these kids. Some of them would have been older than me. But I show up on the scene around November of 1979. And as I explained, I started school after Christmas. And the first setup would have been around June of 1980, where I was over a new friend's house. He broke into his grandfather's liquor cabinet. We got drunk. An ambulance hauls me off. And this is where I have missing time from June of 1980 up until 1982, where I can show that soccer plaque with my picture. So here I am in this town, Vernon, and what they do with these trauma-based mind control victims is they have to isolate them. In order for all this to work, they have to carefully keep these boys isolated. Now, I as I said, I've been looking for these MK Ultra survivors in my age group concerning males, and they're no longer around, folks. So you better pray to God that I'm not one of the last ones in my age group. Because I laugh at this whole phony targeted individual community. Unless you've had attempts made on your life, unless you're down to your last penny, you don't know where your next meal's coming from, well, then you're doing okay, folks. And I know that there's good people out there that unfortunately are confused about the way this works. And these families that come from these bloodlines on what it's all about. So they bring me out here to New Jersey. They got the first setup, which I'm assuming was necessary. Now, as it relates to the Montauk Project, why, again, I'll keep stating this, 4 fucking people survived to live, to create the myth, to tell the story. Al Bielek, Preston Nichols, Duncan Cameron, and Stuart Swerdlow. It's impossible, folks. And no one knows where these Montauk boys are. So the first myth of the Montauk Project, as it relates to what went on between the years 1980 and 1983, or just as I stated, there was a few hand-picked kids early on, yes. What they do is, when they experiment, they use non-bloodliners, people that are expendable. They figure out what works, what doesn't, and once they got that wired, then they bring in the bloodliners, and they go to town on them. So Al always claims that this Montauk Project, well, let's back up. Stuart claims that as a teenager in 1970, he was recruited somehow. He finds himself working at Montauk for the next 13 years. Now, again, I've explained Stuart's a human, but he's a sellout who uses the technology. He knows about the gang stalking. He would have had many attempts on his life to shut him up and keep him in line. So I know how it works. But Stuart was able to make a choice. Instead, he 13 cubed his way out and does his little, his version of the Montauk Project. But we know, according to Al, that around 1976 is when a lot of this Reichian physical programming took place. And that would have took place up until the electronic style programming kicked in around 1980. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole thing with Reichian programming. It's, people got to do your research. And we know Wilhelm Reich is very intricately involved as it relates to experimentation that was going on back in the 50s after the whole Philadelphia experiment and everything. So the point is, Al says that these kids were put through Reichian programming. He claims that he complained that none of this was working. We were causing more problems and doing good, figuring out how to mind control these children. And as time drug on, by 1980, they, according to Preston, had been able to establish electronic style programming. Now, what we have to understand is the Montauk Project will forever be connected with the Philadelphia experiment. And the expert on that became Al Bielek after he recovered his memories starting around, there's varying accounts, you gotta, this is taking me 10 years to listen to all this malarkey. The short of it is, after viewing the Philadelphia experiment movie, he was slowly recovering memories, but somehow he ran into Preston and Duncan. He first states it was 1985 at a psychotronic conference or something like that in Ohio. And then he also states it was 1989 in New York City in a psychotronic conference. where that is the more likely place where these people come together. So I'm assuming that a lot of you are familiar with this story concerning the Philadelphia experiment. We know that our American government, we know the Nazis, we know the Brits were all working on ways to detect the enemy and stay hidden from the enemy. And I've gone over the whole thing with Winston Churchill's diaries and the Wizard War concerning radar, and how he stated that they used these sorcerers, these diviners, and whoever else to get the radar system going up and down the English coast. But it appeared that the Nazis were already way, way ahead of them. But what was America up to? Well, we know that we cite the work of Einstein and Tesla. Al Bielek is somewhat of a Tesla expert. If you listen to his talks, he knows just about everything about Tesla. So apparently, the precursor to all this work that was done by Einstein, Tesla, and others would take place on Princeton University campus at the Institute.
Daddy,
Yes.
can I use the phone? My school finished.
Okay, buddy. Let me. I'll give it to you in a second. Okay.
Thank you.
We're gonna make this part one. So, the Institute of Advanced Study was located on Princeton University. It had nothing to do with Princeton, but it was located in a building on the campus. By that time, Tesla already apparently had been working on anti-gravity, working on electromagnetic energy as it relates to free energy, many other projects. We know Einstein with his unified field theory. So, coupled with all this experimentation, led up to what the Americans wanted to figure out on how to produce invisibility technology as it relates to warfare, to the military. If you're out on the Atlantic Ocean, you're carrying supplies to England for the war, you've got the U-boats out there, the wolf pack, that are just blowing you to smithereens. How can we avoid these U-boats? Well, let's make these ships invisible somehow. Let's make them invisible to their radar. So a lot of this experimentation actually produced fruit. And apparently, according to Al, Tesla was able to make a ship without people on it disappear from radar. And so the next step is how do we make it disappear completely so the human eye can't see it? And this is what the Philadelphia experiment was all about. So according to Al, Tesla was so critical to this that it got to the point where he, meaning Tesla, felt that the power needed to produce the electromagnetic fields around an object would have been so powerful and damaging to humans that his conscience was telling him that, you know what, we gotta spend more time on this. And as Al stated, these war planners, they don't want to hear that. They need this experiment up and going now. And according to Al, on July 22nd, 2000 or not. See, gets so confusing. Let's back up. According to Al, Tesla at some point during 1942 sabotaged an experiment to get himself released from the whole mess. And that's exactly what happened. And this is where this von Neumann character steps in. So von Neumann steps in. He springboards off of Tesla's work, and apparently he's a genius in his own right. So he fine-tunes this, and you have the one experiment on July 22nd, 1943, which appears to be successful, except there were crew members on the ship, and they all became very ill. All of them became quarantined, but this experiment was going to continue, and they were going to perfect it. So what happens is, on August 12th, 1943, they get everything in place. There's observer ships, von Neumann, naval commanders are all on these observer ships. According to Al, who was Ed Cameron back then, him and his brother Duncan were handpicked with 33 other people, folks. All right, I can get this. I got it on tape. Remember, I've recorded this stuff for years now. And he was of, I think, 2 of the 12 officers, and the rest were enlisted. So either way, Al and Duncan, with all their training, they're in the bowels of the ship where all this equipment is set up, and they fire it up. It appears everything's going okay at first, but then something dreadfully wrong is starting to occur. They're seeing sparks flying, flashing, and they don't know what's going on. So they go up to the top of the ship on deck, and at that point, I guess apparently a green mist was forming around the Eldritch, creating the electromagnetic bottle that the Eldritch would be inside and make it invisible. Well, not only did it make it invisible, apparently the pulse of this electromagnetic field was so powerful, it ripped a hole in the time-space continuum and created a vortex and had sent the ship, the Eldritch. Apparently it appeared in Virginia somewhere, but during this process, Al and Duncan are scared and jump off the ship, and they fly through this vortex, or propelled through this vortex, and end up in Montauk, Long Island, on August 12th, 1983. They're immediately scooped up by the helicopter, as Al states, and brought down into the subterranean complex there on Fort Hero at Montauk. And there they are greeted by an elderly Dr. Van Neumann. Al says, "This is impossible. We just left you in 1943. Von Neumann tells him that yes, but I'm here now, and we have a problem. We have created a hyperspace, a bubble in hyperspace, and if we do not do something quickly about this, we are going to be in deep doo-doo. And we need you and Duncan to go back and start destroying the equipment on the Eldritch to get this thing powered down, because we can't do it from our end." So I'm gonna stop this right here because my son wants to phone. He's been doing his school for the past 4 hours online. It's been a very difficult month for me, as I don't sleep well, and I get up and I help him out. So I want to make him happy. But here is first or second myth about Montauk Project on how the destruction of the equipment occurred and how the project essentially just collapsed. Now, the one story is Al and his brother Duncan get sent back to the Eldritch, August 12th, 1943, because in 1983 we have a working time tunnel. We have a working ability to create a vortex or a wormhole and do this. So that's what happens. Al and Duncan go back, start to smash the equipment, but apparently Al stayed and Duncan jumped back off the ship again. Well, here's the first problem we got, folks, with this Montauk Project, okay? And keep in mind, these four people, these characters, Al, the Illuminati programmer by night and electrical engineer by day, Preston Nichols, the Draco hybrid Nazi creation, Duncan Cameron, who is nothing but a little baby Draco hybrid, and then Stuart Swerdlow, the commie, all right? These four people were definitely a part of something, because you just cannot come up with these stories and not, you know. So here's the problem, folks. Apparently, what we were told by Preston is that they got a conscience. Their conscience was working on them around the summer of 1983, and they could no longer continue this because what was going on was so horrific, and they wanted to find a way to sabotage this program, this disgusting mind control program, which really is nothing but a bunch of satanic rituals, observers of times, the whole nine yards. And yes, they definitely got some type of technology, but Preston says that what they did, they came up with the bright idea is that Duncan's going to sit in a Montauk chair and create some monster, which apparently happened. And Junior suddenly appears out on Fort Hero and starts going around destroying everything on Fort Hero. And the funny part is that's happening, and they needed a way to somehow shut this equipment off. So as Preston had stated, they were going around cutting up wires, destroying equipment on their end. Well, meanwhile, you got to remember, Duncan and Al were on the Eldritch again, destroying that equipment. So what you're in, folks, is a case of what came first, the chicken or the egg. All right? Now, Al and Duncan show up in 1983, August 12th, 1983, greeted by Van Neumann. What the fuck was Preston, Duncan, and Stuart doing that day? Okay, well, they say they were there that day, and he never talks about seeing Al or Duncan. Of course, remember, look, their memories were wiped. They were under mind control too. I know all about this garbage, folks, all right? It's called selective memory, all right? These creepy chameleon Canaanites will tell you what you want to hear, and when you put the screws to them, they can't remember a thing. So the point is, folks, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did Junior, Preston, and Duncan destroy the equipment and stop the bubble in hyperspace? Or was it Al and Duncan, or Edward Cameron and Duncan? Do you see how confusing this gets, folks? See, none of these people can corroborate their stories. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue with part 2. And I tell you what, I don't know how this turns out, but I'm going to post this up and we're just going to run with it, folks, because I've got nothing to lose. I've got no money. I've got implants rotting in my head. I've got a family that sold me out and have left me hung out to dry. Meanwhile, you so-called targeted individuals are tiptoeing through the tulips. Yeah, well, good luck.